Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Show Up with Cameron Gran. I am your host, Cameron Gran, and today we will be going over an episode of Bomb. It's called 6,000 Bootleg T-Shirts and a Prada Handbag. I don't know what it's about. I mean, I've seen the show, I just don't remember what this episode's about. The synopsis is Christy makes a new friend, Regina, who is an amazing actress named Octavia Spencer. Don't know if you heard about her, but she's hilarious. Regina, who has big problems. She basically launders a lot of money from people, and then she's on the run from the cops. So not the best person to befriend, but when we're all struggling, and especially in this show where they're all going to AA and just struggling in general, a part of what happens in this episode is Regina bonds with Christy, and that friendship allows her to consider what she's been doing in her own life, and maybe even realize that she might have a problem with alcohol as well. And then, meanwhile, Bonnie attempts to put someone else's needs ahead of her own. And since Bonnie is a very selfish person by nature, this is growth for her. Uh, as a reminder, before we dive into this episode, I am not a therapist. I am just somebody going along his own mental health journey, trying to give little tips and tricks that I have learned to you guys, so you guys can use them if you like or not. All this is up to you guys. The one thing I will say is, it's been a while, so if you guys don't know, the reason why I watch Mom, the reason why I decided to make it the sitcom that I watch regularly, is my family has a lot of addicts in it. And the show does a really good job of not only matching the reality of what that looks like, but also like how important it is to remain accountable for your actions if you are an addict, because that can be very hard for your family members. And I think that there is a lot of strength in being somebody in a family and deciding to show, I call it tough love. And the thing that I try to reiterate with people if I ever cut somebody off is, I've have since realized that I am different in the way that I view certain things. Like, if you upset me, I'm not going to hate you for that thing. I'm just going to reorganize our friendship, or replace it. And the reason why I'm saying that kind of phrasing is because a lot of times, especially with what happened with my sister, is I realized that there's a difference between disagreeing with somebody and not liking somebody, or and then placing that person as though they aren't even human. And that's something that I don't think anybody should ever do to somebody else, because I think part of the problem that arises when you are struggling with something, especially with something that is frowned upon by society, like drugs are, when you are struggling and you feel like you need help, it's hard to find that help because you feel like you're going to just keep being met up with judgment. And one of the big things I like about the show, especially in DBT, especially, is like, you can't fix the problem. You can't like change who you are or become a better person if you're too afraid to admit all and accept all parts of yourself. And that's what I think DBT is it's like you have other parts of yourself that for me, what happened was suicide or is like stigmatized by society. And when I started having those feelings, I noticed that uh, I wasn't allowing myself to just have those feelings and let them go. I was holding on to them and feeling shame for them because I didn't know why that I was experiencing that, when it seemed like nobody else was feeling that same emotion. And that's never the case, but it is just something that happens when you feel alone. And the thing that helped me was when I just accepted that that's just part of me. Uh, for instance, a lot of people are like, oh, well, when you have those thoughts, usually that's a mark of something bad happening in your life. Or usually usually people are happy all the time, because those thoughts are also not associated with happiness. It's always associated with like dark things happening in your life, and that's why all of a sudden you're feeling a certain way. And that was never the case with me. Literally every single day I'd be like, what is wrong with me? Because I would have really good days. Like, I remember in like my junior year of high school, I love acting. And the entire year I went to school, and it was also the year that I was doing like band and choir a lot. So I was also expressing that joy that I had in my life. and I was so happy because I was expressing myself so much creatively. And then after I did those things in school, I would then go to different acting things because I was in a lot of like plays, and then there was also community theater, and I did that as well. And all those things made me really really happy. And the thing that it provided me is I did not grow up in what I felt like was a safe home. And so being outside of the home made me feel safe. And today, now I've realized, is I don't associate home with being happy because I was doing all these things to keep busy so I never had to go home. And now when I spend so much time at home, it makes me feel ill. And not always mentally ill. Sometimes it's also like I just feel ill in my body because I don't want to be here. But like my body was giving chemicals like because like you train yourself like these are the things that I have done to like for myself to feel happy, and these are like so if I'm sad I'll do these things because those give me joy. And then if I my brain's weird in the fact that I also sometimes send my signals to myself to make me sad if it's been too long since the last time we were sad. And for some reason, and I think it's because of things that happened with my father, I've always had a blocker when it comes to anger. And I've realized in recent years that like anger is not a terrible emotion to have. I just have always blocked it because the way that anger was expressed to me and shown to me, it was in a very unsafe way, and it always felt like it could happen at any second. Like you could just somebody could become super violent, and what that was always being bottled up, not dealing with the real problem. And I realized that because of that, I always shut down anger. And then I realized, oh, anger's not the problem. It's the fact that you're bottling things up to the point that it comes out as anger. And that helped me a lot. And that's kind of the thing that I realized, like there's certain emotions that I put judgment on. And when I have those judgments, that's when like the wave starts to become more of an incline going straight up. And so it's harder to what's funny about what I just that example is like obviously on a hill, if it's a straight incline up, you're not going to get up that hill. So it would seem like that's very helpful. But in a wave, if it's too high, it just washes over you. Um, and that's kind of what happened to me a lot growing up. Is I thought I was doing all these things, and then I thought I was happy, and told myself I was happy, and and that's why there's I think an issue with trying to put a happy spin on everything. Not if you're because I think it's good to be an inherently happy person, but there's a difference between being inherently happy and then somebody who things happen and you're just trying to block out the bad thing and replacing with something that is just a little bit more happy than what just actually happened. Because then it feels like you're putting like a filter over everything. And for me, removing that filter made me realize that like there was like a thing used in How I Met Your Mother when somebody's about to break up with somebody, and it's called like rose-colored glasses. It's like, oh, this person that you're in love with or you're dating has been treating you really bad for so long, and then you finally make that decision to break up with them, and then all of a sudden all the things that you hated about the relationship are things that you love again because it's like you're seeing it as though it's the last time, and so you're like making things precious that shouldn't be. But then you're like, oh well, things are actually not that bad, and it's because you've now turned on those rose colored glasses, and things that are bad are now being perceived as not. And that's kind of what happens with my brain, is the fact that like when things are bad, I have these thoughts. And when things are happy, I have these thoughts. And when things are just middle of the road, I have these thoughts. And because I was always having them, I started placing all this judgment on myself instead of just accepting the fact that I am just somebody who has those thoughts every day. And when I finally accepted that thought and realized, oh, that's okay, because I don't do anything with them. It's when I try to hide and like bar myself from that reality that things start to go haywire. And that gave me power over it, I felt. But that's my own mental health and how like my approach felt, because I did voice that to like a therapist once, and she was like, well, I don't know if I would just accept that that was something that was happening to you. And I was like, well, there's a thing in DBT that's called rational acceptance, and it's just this thing that eventually happens where like you accept the fact that there are things that are outside of your control, because when you're very much struggling mentally, you think that you can control everything. And that's simply not the case. We're human. We're not omnipotent beings. We cannot like control and make sure that nothing bad will ever happen. It's just not the reality of it. But I feel like the biggest lie you can tell yourself is that you can control that. And that lie is what leads to a lot of problems in my case. But that when I accepted the fact that I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to deal with those dark thoughts, and that they're okay. They're part of me, and I'll know that my brain just needs to express something, and I can listen to that expression without making it the reality of how I feel about myself or what I actually intend to do in that moment or ever in my life. And I think it's very freeing because then it's like you're taking record, you're taking note. Um, I don't love science, but something that I love is that if you look at something as more of an experiment, it gives you the ability to be like, oh, well, we're going to do this for a couple of days and see how we feel at the end of it. And then do it at least 3 times over. So then it actually is kind of an experiment because you have to do any scientific experiment 3 times to make sure that the results you got were actually solid results, or if they were just something that happened under like special circumstances that aren't the common thing. I'm not going to go further into how you prove something in science because I am not an expert. I struggled so much in science and math. It's not even funny. But something else I realized on this same point of just rational acceptance is the fact that I am not good at finances. And I used to be really bad at myself and beat myself up for that fact. And like I would start, and then I started looking at it as though it was an issue that I could never solve. It was just something that was a part of me. And then I finally realized that the thing that I fear most, and it's been ingrained in me since childhood, is just being homeless. And then the times that I've approached that reality has always been from the fact that I am so short-sighted when it comes to finances, and I do think that I have a job that if I could actually approach my finances in the correct way would provide me with those safety nets that I've been wanting my entire life. And then I'm going to school right now, and that schooling could also set me up for a very successful place in my life. And that's just something that I wanted to share with you guys. It's like we all have these things that we like are like we all have parts of ourselves that we are scared to accept about ourselves, and if we're scared to accept them, then they have power over ourselves. Whereas if we just accept the fact that that's a part of us, we can then figure out the way to cope with it. My depression flares up sometimes, and sometimes it's a result of something that I did, and then I can be like, okay, how do we prevent that thing from escalating to this point again? So there, I don't feel out of control as I normally do, or how do I make it so I don't feel miserable all the time? And then when I am feeling miserable all the time, something that I've now had to catch myself doing is when you are in the bad times, it can be very easy to judge yourself for being in that place, and that judgment can lead to that bad time lasting way longer than it would otherwise if you just accepted that that's where you're at in this moment. And that's something that I've been trying to do more, is catching thoughts in general and just being like, hey, listen, I get that you're a thought that's meant to help me, or I get that you're a thought that's meant to harm me. Thank you for coming. I need you to leave me alone. I need my brain to be on mute. I need it to just not be present, because something that I realized I was doing so much is I was creating so much noise in my brain that the thought of doing anything was like, oh, how can we torture ourselves today? And then I'm like, well, I went to the movies because I wanted to be like happy, like just escape for a little bit, kind of bring up my like endorphins, like get a little happiness a little bit, and then like reapproach life once I'm out of the movie. And I make it a point to myself to always be like, hey, we're dealing with stuff, we have schoolwork to do, or we have emotions we're trying to deal with, but we go to the movies to give ourselves a break for those 2 hours. And in those 2 hours, we don't think about any of that stuff. We just focus on what the story in front of us is being presented. And when I don't do that, and I'm watching something and all of the stuff is sinking in, that's when I'm like, hey, you made a promise to yourself that you weren't going to think about this stuff, and you're now intensifying it so that way I no longer am part of this movie watching experience. I'm overanalyzing and super focusing on things that don't matter. And how does this all relate to mom, and why I wanted to go into that speech? It's very much the case of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the main premise of the show. They do deal with other things that people struggle with as well, but the major part of it is acceptance. That's the first step, because once you accept it as a reality as being part of yourself, you can then figure out how to set yourself up for success. And the other thing that I feel like they reiterate over and over and over again is no two people are going to have the same point of success. Because Christy in this show blames a lot of her own problems on her mother, and Bonnie is not as like, I don't think she has as much like guilt as other people when it comes to things, and so her coming into being okay with what she did happens a lot quicker than Christy would like, and something that she has to learn is that her mother's sobriety journey is not her own, and so she has to look at what's actually happening between the relationship and whether or not the current relationship is better than it was before, because just because somebody doesn't approach like their betterment the way that you want them to doesn't mean that they aren't doing it the right way, because your way that you wish somebody would do something is not good. One of the like, it's not the only way is what I'm trying to say, because the only thing that I've always had a problem with is like, if somebody like, I've had roommates, I grew up with my family, and there's chores. We all have chores. We all have cleaning. If you're looking at like this video, I know the background's a little messy. I have to clean my kitchen. It's fine, but I sometimes have this thing in me where like, if somebody wants me to do something, I'm like, okay, yeah, if you want me to take out the trash, I'll go take out the trash. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, no, if you're gonna take out the trash, you have to do it in these certain ways. And then I'm like, well, why? Especially if like the only thing that changes is like, oh, taking out the trash is replacing the trash bag, throwing away the trash, and that's all that she wrote. That's all it is. That's taking out the trash. And then somebody's like, no, no, no. This is how taking out the trash is supposed to look. And then they're like, this step one, step two, step three, step four. And then like, you have to do these steps. And then that's when I have a problem, because I'm like, well, I'm okay with doing this because it's a chore for the household. But if you want me to follow your exact regimen, that feels like you're overstepping, because now it's not my choice doing these things. You're just making it so I have no choice in the matter, and that I think is wrong. Personally, is like, you want something done, tell me what you want done, and I will get it done how I can do it in my own way. And if that thing works how you want it, and the task gets accomplished, and and it functions correctly, everything is operating properly, then that's a success. You shouldn't be upset because it wasn't happening the way that you wanted it to happen. Because with roommates, I think a huge thing that people should talk about is how do we want the group shared spaces to be. That's where I think that you can have those conversations about like, oh, how do I want this? And then I do think that there should be like, this is the level that I am going to do, and I will do this level for you. If you want it further than that, that's fine, but you have to push it higher if you want it higher. But I will do it this much. And then, because then what happens is people start judging the fact that it's not done the way they want it, and they don't give credit to people that have done certain things, like chores, for example. And I'm like, well, because everyone has different levels of cleanliness. Everybody has different things that matter to them. But like, well, cleaning up, like throwing out trash and stuff like that, and making sure like walkways are clear, and then like, you could have places to put things down. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, well, I want this thing over here because that's how I prefer it being over here. And then like, well, it's easier if it's over here. It's like, those are all things, if you're gonna have a roommate, you need to like discuss and figure out in the group area how that's supposed to look. But the thing that I always have told people is, okay, the group area, let's agree how that's going to be, and then that's the agreement. If you want to change that agreement, you need to talk to me as a group again. You can't just like dictate that that's how it is now, because that's not how the group decided, if that makes sense. And then my own room is how I want things because that's my space. And yeah, that's how I've always felt. It's like that's your space, you want to live in it, and that's what matters and what helps with you. And that's kind of like part of the thing that's explored in Mom is how does a mother and daughter who got estranged because of their addictions work through that and then become better people, better like mother and daughter to each other, and how do they work through the traumas that they put to each other so that they can have a close relationship again. With that, I'm going to start the episode. Uh, Alrighty, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. We are a minute and 13 seconds into the show. Opening tag of the episode is Christy in her car with her son driving him to school, and they are doing daily affirmations, which it's very interesting the way that it's presented because I've never actually listened to somebody doing affirmations and then you repeat after them. Maybe that works. I've always learned them like you create them for yourself, but they're like she's learning them through like a self help tape. So that was interesting. And then part of the joke that happens in the show is she's like, one of the things is, I respond peacefully to every situation. And then that happens right as her car broke down and she was like hitting her steering wheel and saying, come on, and really upset. And I just find it like, it's just so easy to get wrapped up in the moment that we lose track of goals for ourselves. And I do think that daily affirmations are a great way to change our outlook on life and train ourselves away from a train of thought that we've allowed to enter our brain palace or train station. So that way we're like, no, we're going to redirect you. You don't get to come into this station anymore. But that's something that you have to do intentionally over time to actually get like programming your brain in that way. 3 minutes and 26 seconds into the show, we just watched a scene with Christine, your ex-husband or boyfriend. I never know if they got married, but she needs help paying for the house. Well, not her house, but the car that she just broke down. And the dad is kind of an unreliable family support person because she automatically says, well, I need you to help me and pay me back the money I helped you get the van because he hasn't been paying child support. And something that I like that they do in this show is very much like, oh, we could have presented this in a very negative way where we're like manipulating or trying to I don't know what it is, but emotional manipulation really gets to me, and I felt like with that kind of conversation, it could have very much led that way. But it was very much like, "Hey, I know that there's something else that would be too much for you, but the car broke down. I really need this. Can you help me with this thing?" And then he comes up with this. The dad comes up with this huge scheme. I'm not even gonna go into it, but the overall thing is that she heard was, "Oh, this dad likes to hide money in her backyard." In the ground, and so Christy then becomes desperate to like get money to fix her car, so she starts digging through her yard, and I think it's interesting the way that that transpired because, um, to me, it's an example of when people take you for granted because this man doesn't have a house, he lives in a van, and then he like hides money that he gets because he gets most of his stuff under the table in her backyard, and he does that instead of actually paying child support. And so that to me just reminded me of like these things that we can do for ourselves, which is like, how can we navigate and not do the things that matter in our lives but stay fixated on the things that are small. Like for instance, in myself, I have a problem with long-term goals, and that in fact I realized recently that I don't know how to set those things up because usually long-term goals are orientated with the fact that eventually we like reward ourselves and like you get a sense of achievement and that kind of stuff, and I've never set up those kind of goals for myself. It's always been something that somebody else has given me, or I have goals that are very temporary. And another thing that I'm working through is it's called distress tolerance, because I've been in survival mode for so much of my life that I usually go with the thing that's the quickest way to give me some kind of endorphin rush that makes me happy, because and that usually means I do things that harm me in the long run, rather than doing the things that will make you feel rewarded over time, but you don't ever like you don't see those results every day, so you feel like you're not doing anything, and that's something I'm trying to change because. For, losing weight is not something that is a huge difference right away. You have to do it repeatedly, establish a pattern, just to get on with that discipline. Because if you don't stick to it, what you lose can come right back, or you just feel like you're on this hamster wheel, and all of the goal of the hamster wheel is just to keep spinning. It's not like meant to actually give you any kind of reward. I mean, hopefully hamsters feel rewarded by that, because that's really what's the only thing in a hamster cage usually is a wheel and then like chips for them to like run around in. Um, but that's kind of the thing that uh, I realized is like, oh, I need to own up to what I've done to myself more, and try to figure out how to do that without judging myself for it. Because it seems to be my first thought always is, oh, you didn't do this thing that you wanted to do, and why didn't you do that thing? And then all of that seems very shame based, and then so that spikes up my depression, and reality is the reality. And so like you have to be like, okay, so if we don't change, if we don't develop this discipline, if we don't stick to this, are we okay with just letting things go? Are you okay with not having these things that you dreamt about? Because if you are, that's okay. But you really need to accept that, because you're still operating as though you're going to have this big thing, but you have to figure out what you actually want if you're going to stick with what you've chosen. Does that make sense? Um, and that's kind of the thing I'm working on, is like how to change from like temporary goals to long-term goals, and make sure that I feel success as I strive to do those things. Because I think that that would be the biggest reward and the biggest change for the positive that I can do in my life. Because so far it's been much of the same thing, and that's what I'm trying to change. 525. We just watched a scene between Christy and Bonnie. And this speaks so much to childhood trauma, because it's been years since this happened. But Christy's struggling. She wants to make rent and fix her car. And so she asked her ex boyfriend, and now she just asked her mother. And her thought process was, oh, if she can't do it, that's fine. And then her mom presents an idea because she's struggling with that money. And she says, well, I can't just give you that money because I'm also living paycheck to paycheck. Uh, and then through all that, also in a classic Bonnie way, she like presents like crazy ideas that are like messed up as though that they're just normal things. And I've realized when you have somebody who, like, because I have a family that are addicts, there are things that they say that I'm just like, that should bother me, but I am so desensitized to this stuff because of how messed up just like it gets, that I'm like, okay, well, this is just like normal for them. If it got way up into this side, then I know this is strange. But Bonnie, despite all that, was like, hey, well, I can't pay that for you because I am paying paycheck to paycheck. But if I moved in with you, then my money for my rent could just go to the house. Then you are getting help with the, like living expenses and like that kind of stuff. And Chrissy's like, yeah, yeah. Well, if I say no, I could end up homeless. But if I say yes, we're living together again. And I had the same thought because my mom was struggling, and I didn't know how much because uh, she never really opened up to me about her addictions. But the thing that I always thought was like, hey, well, I'll just talk to you and present what I think will help. Because when I was planning on moving to California, and I'm saving up to do that, and I'm working my finances so I can make that a reality, the thing that we talked about that I realized was my mom always feels alone. Nobody really talks to her, and people don't hang out with her as much as she wants. And it would help us both if I had somebody who was like a roommate that I trusted in California. And this is before I knew about everything else. And then so I had asked her before she passed away if when I moved she wanted to come with me, because then I like we could share expenses, and because nothing really tied her to our hometown anymore. Um, and she's thinking about it, and I thought that she had said yes, but maybe I'm misremembering that. But when I had to do a lot of thinking, and that's kind of what Christy's doing now about like, okay, what are the things that happened while we were living together? like the things that traumatized you, are they things that you think have lessened enough that you could tolerate living with this person again? Because if it's the same level and you feel like you're not ready to cope with that or don't know how to, then it's a bad idea that would harm you both more in the long run. And that's kind of what Christy is dealing with now, as we continue the episode, is she's trying to gauge whether or not that's a good idea or not. 7:45, and Octavia Spencer now entered the picture. Her name's Regina in the show, and something that she's struggling with is she was in a meeting of AA, and she doesn't feel like she belongs there. And something that I think that they do really well in the show, and what I feel resonates with me so much in my own mental health, is the fact that when you are at the worst part of it, when you decide that you need help, like it's too much to handle on your own, and there's no shame in that. It's if it's too much and you need help, ask for it. I think there's so much beauty when you do ask, because people do want to help. And I think that there's this false belief that if you ask for help, then you're somehow less of a person. And that's not the case at all, because I think there's a lot of strength in asking for that help. And what Regina was crying, she didn't really like talk that much in the meeting. And Christy gets Bonnie to come along with her to just take this woman out to lunch, because she is struggling and she's new to it, and but she hasn't really fully accepted her problem yet. And that's something that they do a lot in the show, is like if there's somebody who's struggling to accept that they do have an addiction, the people in the AA program, at least in this show, kind of gather around her and try to help them with their sobriety journey, and just getting through like acceptance and then figuring out the next steps to just add more and more days of sobriety as it happens. And that's kind of the thing. And then the reason why this show resonates with me so much with my mental health is, earlier I was talking about the fact that like I always think about suicide, and I had a lot of judgment, and then eventually I realized it's just part of me, and that it's just something I'm like, okay, well, that's that thought for today, and that's okay, but it doesn't mean we have to act upon it or even give it more power than it really required. It's just, it's Tuesday, and that so Tuesday's like thought happened right now. And a lot of people that are addicts, or like especially alcohol or other drugs, they think that sobriety means that you no longer think about that thing anymore, and that's not true. You do think about it. That's why also losing weight is really hard, because I have done things that are better, but then I am still always obsessed about eating, and food is the hardest, I think, addiction to get over, because unlike the other things I've mentioned, is you don't need to be like, you don't need alcohol in your life. My thing is harder for this example, but like alcohol is easier to quit, and then there's like Gamblers Anonymous eventually makes its way into Mom, but even that has like a pattern and like how you can like get rid of that. But it's harder to get rid of a food addiction, because you need food to survive, and it's something that you will always need daily. And realizing that and accepting the fact that it works means that you have to figure out a game plan that works with like, how can I lose weight and give my body what it needs in a day without going too far, or without putting so many limits on myself that it's not a strong thing anymore. It actually makes me feel weak and like I'm losing something. And all of that comes with just it's just all that comes when you open the door and just take that first step onto the path of fixing your mental health. And that's what I love about so I love the character Regina and Octavia Spencer, because I think she shows like the power of some things come into your life, and like you don't know the reality of it, but the more you explore it, the more you know whether or not you actually are this thing, and the more you can take certain aspects of it and better yourself and better your life. 9:45. Let's talk about denial for a second. Whenever you have a problem, eventually, when you're especially when you're getting to the point where you are like, I might need to ask for help, there's a thing that comes into play, and it's called denial, because that's kind of what happens in the scene with Regina and Christine Bonnie, and then the restaurant, and they're just sharing like things that happen because of their like alcohol addiction, and then Regina is talking, and she's like, well, I'm not that, I'm not on your level, I don't have an issue, I just like to cut like back every like after I get off work because I manage all these people's money by like, drinking a lot and doing all these things. But so what, at the end of the day at 6 a.m every morning, I get myself off that floor and I go right back to work and I'm fine. That's good, that's a good life right there. And it's like she keeps saying I'm fine, and I think that's the message of people who are not fine, is you can say I'm fine and that's fine. Oh crap, I went into a loop, um but if you're just repeating I'm fine a lot when people ask you that question and when they press you, you might want to take a breath and think, are you really fine? Because it seems like you're just trying to convince other people that you are doing way better than you actually are, because you don't want to admit the fact that you aren't doing fine. Because if you admit that fact, you'll have to accept the reality of who you are, which is the scariest thing you can do, especially if you fear the fact that you messed up so bad that the people that you care about might leave you. My issue has always been with that specific particular thing, is I've always had that fear, but ironically, without any help from me, people have left me, and I don't know why. And I talked about ghosting the other day, and I just think it's sad in today's culture that people can't just be open and like upfront about how they feel about other people. But that's kind of the thing, that we have these fears and they're implanted in us like when we're really young, and then eventually we're like, oh, I had all these fears about people leaving because of these mistakes I'm making. But then you have to do a real look around and be like, I'm afraid of losing these people, but these people are not treating me as though they even care if I wasn't here anymore, which is a bad thought. I'm not gonna call it irrational, but there's a term for it. I just don't think I can think of it right now. But it's like a bad thought that isn't actually valid. That we present ourselves to validate our bad thoughts, which means they're invalid. I'm talking in a loop, but basically, denial is a hard thing to get past. But you have to get past denial before you can get into like acceptance, and then figure out those tools and tricks that you can use to help you on your journey. Because you're never gonna find those things if you don't even accept the fact that you're on this road and that you're at a crossroads. You don't know whether or not to go left or right. You just know that if you don't ask for directions, you're always going to be lost, and never know which path to take. We are at 1956. That was a long time before I paused, because it was basically a whole scene where Regina, was opened up about the fact that she was embezzling about $3 million from her clients because she works in a money managing place. I don't know what she called it, but she manages money and they trust her, and she says, well, they shouldn't, because she's definitely been embezzling from them. And then her big plan is to flee the country. She was trying to go to Canada, and then Bonnie told her, well, you can get extradited from Canada if you try to escape there. And then she tries to go to Mexico, but instead just goes back to Christy and Bonnie's house where she had been escaping from. And I think the biggest thing that she realized was, not only was she guilty from this, and so she's trying to run, but then she's like, well, I just have to accept it's coming. But then she realized, hey, this is the first night in about 17 years where I haven't drunk anything, and that's because of how much she's been dealing with like the situation she got herself in. And that's just like, you'll never know how crazy your road to acceptance is going to be until you're there. Because sometimes it hits you when you're not ready for it. And I think the biggest thing that I love about this show is the fact that at the end of this entire chase scene between all of them, Regina offers to give Christy, who's been struggling, like money to like take care of everything. And then Christy's like, well, I don't think I should take your money. That wasn't what I did this for. I did this to help you. And then Regina goes, oh, well, it's not my money. And she's like, well, still, that's wrong, even if, because then I'm still taking embezzled money from you. But I don't know, there's beauty in like just helping somebody else out, and I think it is really sweet, and it shows Christy's character that that's all she wanted from her, because did want help, and to not take that from somebody in need, like who's in need, who could offer that to her, I think is a really beautiful thing, especially when Bonnie the entire time is telling Christy to take this money. And then I also like the fact that in that scene, Bonnie and Regina have an understanding that Regina does not like Bonnie, even though she really likes Christy. And I also think that's really powerful because I think that there's like a false narrative out there that you're going to like every single person, or that you're going to be friends with everybody that's a good person. Because that's definitely been like a false thing that I've believed for a lot of time is like, oh, this is a good person and we could get along in some scenarios, then we should be friends, if not best friends. And then you realize over time that, oh, we're not good for each other and this is probably the wrong thing to do. And I just, I think there's a beauty in that kind of acceptance that can happen. And something that I hope will happen because Regina's kind of accepting the fact that she's going to have to go to prison, is that now that she's like, oh, not only am I an alcoholic, because Bonnie reminds her that there are AA programs in prison, that not only will she go in and like accept that fact and try to change, it will be kind of like a learning opportunity for her. Because I think that when you do something that's wrong and you go to prison, you could either take that as an opportunity of like, oh, my life is getting wasted, or if you're like, well, you're getting an opportunity to like not only pay for your crime but also to like rethink the choices that got you to these consequences. And I think reanalyzing those kind of aspects can really be pivotal in changing some things that are going on that are not beneficial for you in the long run. The end of the episode is Christy coming to the realization that she's going to need her mother's help paying the bills. A beautiful thing that happens is her ex boyfriend does come through and give her some money to help her with things. But I also think that she can fix her car now, but that still leaves her in a place where she's not completely financial safe to like, I know, live alone. And so she realizes that she's going to need her mom to help her out with bills. And I think that's a good thing to like come to grasp with, was the fact that like, oh, this isn't something I normally would want, but it's something that's going to be really beneficial to my family, and the pros far outweigh the cons in the situation. And that's something that really helped me is like when I left Washington and I came to Minnesota, there was a lot of things like, oh, I have family in Washington and I only have a couple of friends here. I had other things that I wanted to do, but it really took a long time for things to get up and running after COVID happened. And after that, I was kind of lost because I had been just like on pause for so long. And something that I really like and I'm working through is just like, hey, um, it's okay to be where you're at. It's fine. And if you need help or if you need to ask others to guide you through something that you're unfamiliar with, that's fine. And if that one of the things is if you need roommates, you can have those. Or if having roommates isn't the best solution for you right now, that's also fine. Uh, Although I will say something I did not realize is that living on your own kind of is like a lockdown effect because you can't really afford to do anything else. Whereas if you live with a roommate, you're affording things a little easier, so it frees up more money to go into savings, which again would help me financially. And I'm trying to figure out how to better myself so that way I can set myself up for success, which it seems like that was what Christy was doing with at the end of the episode. It's like, okay, well, I've gotten my car problem fixed, but how can I fix all these bills that I also see after that? And what can my mother help me do that would just be beneficial in the long run? And that's something that I think is very important. And that's the end of the episode. Thank you guys for so much for watching. I hope that this was very beneficial for you guys, that you guys learned some things, and then any of these little tidbits you guys can take and try in your own life, or just like give you a chance to think and ponder something, because that usually is what helps me, is just having small little opportunities to reanalyze things going on in my life or ways that I looked at things so I can benefit and become a little bit better in the future. So thank you. I will see you guys next time. And as always, if you go throughout the week, don't forget to stop, take a breath, and just remember to show up for yourself because you matter.